If you want to go, let's get started. Hi, good evening, everyone. It's 7:35, and we're starting tonight's meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. Let's begin with roll call. Adam Barkovic's chair.
Catherine Welsh.
Elizabeth Harlow.
Dana White.
Cody Imbier.
Julia Quinn.
We're missing Phil Ferranda tonight, who couldn't make it due to a work emergency. The first item on the agenda is our public hearing regarding the application of Plateau Associates LLC, which is seeking a certificate of appropriateness for the deconstruction of the Granville Pearl Factory office building and the construction of an open-air pavilion in its place. At this time, I invite the applicant to address the commission.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Michael Zarin. Here on behalf of Plateau Associates. I want to thank you for meeting tonight. We know this has obviously been a sensitive issue, and I know we've all worked extremely hard to bring this issue to a resolution that will hopefully be a positive one, good for the village, good for preservation, and good for the residents of the village under the circumstances, the unique circumstances of this site. I know everyone has read our cover letter, so I won't bore you and go through all the details. But as everyone knows, we've been at this for over 10 years. Exhaustive secret process, years before the planning board. We just spent months before the village board. We've been before the ZBA. We've been through SHPO. And we've worked again hard to come up with a reasonable solution for the office building and for the deconstruction and the creation of a historical open-air pavilion to memorialize its existence and to act as a destination, a historical informational center for the village for years to come. I'm not going to reiterate the benefits of this project. We've laid it out in full in the letter. It's been something that the planning board, after years of review, found in their findings statement. The village board endorsed it, the ZBA, and so forth. It's truly a revitalization of this area. It's going to open up Crawbucky with the sidewalks and make the preserve more accessible. We're setting aside another 1.5 acres to expand Crawbucky with trails and the like. It's solar, which is it's going to meet LEEDs, LEED approvable, highest standard as set forth in the code. There's a lot of true benefits to this project. This is as you all know, a rather dilapidated area. It'll be the first time stormwater is managed and handled in this area. It's never been handled before. It's always been runoff into the Hudson River. Now for the first time in this industrial area, the stormwater will be handled in the best practices and the like. So you're all familiar with the letter from SHPO of no adverse impact of January 31st, 2019. It was consistent with the findings of the planning board that the SHPO was requiring, as part of a deconstruction of the office, a architecturally significant new pavilion with decorative features to be carefully removed and stored for future reuse. They also required interpretive materials, panels, and kiosks depicting the history of the site. SHPO relied on a report from West New York that most of you, I assume, have read, They are a reputable preservation entity. Members of this board and other representatives of the village met with them at length for a couple of hours to question them and question their report and question the assumptions. And I think, you know, I'm sure you've all spoken among yourselves, but I think they were credible. They were credible with respect to moving. This building would be in the range of about 1.5 to 2 million, assuming it was intact. They also made specific recommendations about the decorative features that can be saved at the building and integrated into the open-air pavilion, and we've taken those to heart. SHPO found that report to be credible. Frankly, they didn't find the previous material to be as credible, but West New York has a strong reputation in the metropolitan region, and they did find the report to be accurate and persuasive. The individual, Kevin Crawford, who met with members of this board and others, I think everyone would agree was very credible and experienced and knew his stuff. Two of the reasons that the office has to be removed. One, we were requested to move the building from the plateau onto the site. That was a specific request of the planning board and the neighbors to the area that is currently housed by the office, by this office. So that was the first compelling reason why the office building could not be saved and restored on this site. Originally, the project was to be built on the plateau and not on this level, on this particular area, and the office building may have been able to be addressed, but the planning board and many members of the public wanted the plateau to be left vacant and undeveloped, and this was the area then that was designated in which to move the building. The other reason is FEMA, and again, we laid that out in detail. The building is, I believe, at an elevation of approximately, what's the elevation of?
The elevation of the office is 8.
At 8, and we need to increase the elevation of that site to 12 to 15 feet for FEMA purposes and for flooding. The elevation 1% storm is at an elevation of 10, up from 7, and a 2.2% storm is at the elevation of 15. So we were required by FEMA and the like to raise the site to 12 to 15 feet, which would have made the restoration of the office building even more difficult, if not impossible, to bring it up. So those were the two compelling reasons that we had to consider the deconstruction of the office building and the creation and the preservation of this pavilion. Again, the pavilion we would submit, and I know it's not the ideal solution of some, but it's something that was discussed at length with the planning board, was discussed at length at public meetings with the village board, was discussed with West New York and others and the staff. We truly want to make it into a multifunctional, robust, meaningful structure and pavilion. We've already talked about increasing and enlarging it from 12 by 18 to 16 by 20. We're enlarging the height from 10 feet to close to 13 feet, almost doubling the volume from 2,300 cubic feet to 4,000 cubic feet. One of the recommendations of the Starian and others was try to preserve some of the white brick and black brick within the bands that reflected the Mount Pleasant Military Academy Library. We incorporated that into the architectural design. We are going to create a protocol for the deconstruction of the building and try to preserve as much of the decorative parapets and some of the other features that can be incorporated into the pavilion. We will do that under the direction and supervision of a trained and preservation and we will make every attempt to the extent we can as practicable to utilize where practical and where we can preserve some of the features into the existing building or into the air pavilion, to the open air pavilion. So we're happy to work with a representative of the board as we go forward. We have to work with the planning board under our BAR. As you know, we have to go for architectural review back to the planning board. So this building will also go back to the planning board for architectural review, and we'll work with them, and we would, of course, want any suggestions from this board. And I guess at this time, we also will have a public easement. We've created parking spaces, public parking spaces for people, to dedicated spaces on the site to get to the building. And we are prepared to move forward. We would not commence deconstruction of the office building until a building permit is issued for the property. That was one of the, I know, the conditions that I know the chairman and others mentioned to us. So we are, I think, at the point that we would ask respectfully for a resolution at your next meeting. We, as you probably know, and our clients will be happy to tell us because they have made this strong case to us, they believe that the demolition was under a valid demolition permit. I do not want to relitigate that now, and I think that's the, we put that in the letter and alike. We have agreed to work into the jurisdiction of this committee with the hope that we could move on and get a resolution and do satisfy the conditions that we've talked about and that you will place on us as articulated, and that's our hope and our expectation. So we're here to cooperate, we've been here to work, and we would hope that you can authorize tonight the preparation of resolution with conditions, of course, and we will be able to move forward and hopefully make everybody proud with a pavilion that will not be inexpensive and will be something meaningful and something that really can be a destination and a learning experience and an appreciation of the history that's on this site. So,
Thank you, Mr. Zarin. Why don't, actually, Mr. Zarin, if you wouldn't mind remaining standing for a few moments, I had some questions. If any other board members have questions, now's the time. And then once you have a seat, we'll invite members of the public to speak on, as to the application. There's a clock for the public indicating 5 minutes. The commission has collectively decided that every member of the public who wants to stand up and share their thoughts on this application will be limited to 5 minutes. But for now, I just have a few quick questions for Mr. Zarin. I'll invite other commission members if they have questions to ask them as well. 2 questions about design elements in the pavilion. I was looking at a photograph, or a number of photographs of the existing office building last night, and the photographs that I studied showed at the base of the office building 2 black bands of bricks. So I would request that the final design incorporate those 2 stripes, for lack of a better term. That's one design point. The second is the medallion that's at the top. That's a new medallion. I could not confirm, and maybe you can. What is there now? It looks like it's just a glass circle, a window.
That might be just a plate, a window, and either a window and or a placeholder for the window.
So
But we're, like I said, as far as we're concerned, you know, this is collaborative, so if you have any suggestions for what should be there, or there's an element in the existing office building you think would be appropriate there, we're certainly open to that.
Okay. And if others have comments about design elements,
we want to
this
hear.
application isn't final and closed. You're open to listening to additional.
Right, like I said, we have to go back to the BAR, and, you know, we're open to hearing it, and as we move forward, if there are additional, we're always open to hear it. I mean, if you start at the beginning and where it is now, you know it's been an evolutionary process with a number of the features included, as well as the dimensions that weren't there, including, you don't see any of the interpretive exhibits and signage. We want to do that with the village historian, and we want to do it with people like Mr. Wunderlich, and, you know, some of the people who have a history here, and really begin to create something that's meaningful and really educational. So those are the types of features that we would want to work. I would respectfully ask or suggest that, you know, obviously you have the village historian on it, but you may want to also appoint a member who continues to talk with us and back and forth, and as you receive any additional suggestions, you convey those to us. We're finalizing or continuing to look. One of the issues is going to be, what are the type of features that we can preserve from the building as we take it down, deconstruct it. And as I said before, we will have a protocol that will design before we begin any demolition, that will be done in consultation with either New York West New York, or another entity that we've identified that will specifically set forth measures that are the most conducive for preserving certain features. That's something that we both are committing to you all, as well we have to commit to SHPA.
That was my next question, is has West New York of Connecticut been retained or otherwise identified as the
We're conferring with them to the extent that they may want to, or they may want to work with another entity that they've recommended. So we're committing to, we will have an entity.
So as I see it, there would be three.
And we would suggest, you know, if you want to put that right in as a condition, we're okay with it.
There'd be three stages to this process. There's deconstructing the office building, there's storing the pieces, and then there's reconstructing the open-air pavilion using pieces of what's salvageable.
Correct.
Would West New York be involved in all three stages?
Don't know yet. We're trying to determine which would be the most appropriate for West New York. They have indicated that there may be people who are better for the actual construction, the actual preservation. They may be more for just some of the overall design, as opposed to, they may recommend different types of consultants that would help us develop the protocol. So it may be West New York, it may be others that have the same credentials and are recommended by them. So.
Any thoughts as to where the pieces would be stored or how they would be stored?
No, we haven't yet. But again, that's something that you can put in your conditions, and then, which is very typical in these types of things, say whatever plan that, when we do come up with the final plan, that it's satisfactory to, you know, chair, maybe, you know, another representative, a historian, or staff. I mean, we have that all the time when we move forward on these type of things, that whatever we do in the future should be satisfactory, reasonable satisfactory to a certain representative.
I'm going to read now just one of the standards from the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Reconstruction. This is one of the standards, and there are about 5 or 6 total. One of the standards is, A reconstructed property will recreate the appearance of the non-surviving historic property in materials, which I want to emphasize, design, color, and texture. And one question I have is about the bricks that are going to be used in the open air pavilion. And I wonder about the applicant's openness to salvaging some of the bricks that still remain from the pill factory itself, which, to my understanding, are in large part sitting in the location of the old pill factory, and or using some of the bricks in the open air pavilion. I wonder if there's been discussion about that.
Yeah, in fact, I believe, you know, when we met with West New York, they had mentioned that they were not sure that the actual bricks were stable enough for any type of structural. They did suggest that some of those bricks be used where possible for facade, so to give the effect, but not have that they wouldn't be stable or solid enough for it to be used structurally. So certainly we're going to look at that and determine to what extent they could be utilized. That was one of the objectives that we discussed, I believe, at the meeting, and we stand by.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Zarin. That's all I have. I'd invite any other commission members if you have questions for Mr. Zarin. Otherwise, we'll turn it over to the public. And I should just add that Phil Ferrandis showed up. Thank you, Phil, for showing up. I know you have.
Can I ask, what is the distance from where the building stands now to where this new building would be? How many yards is that?
I don't know, but it's right across.
If you go to the A5, in the upper left corner, if you could zoom. Yeah. You can see the proposed location and the proposed, look at that on the other side
Where's
of the
the
road.
current location?
Sort of right, it's off, it's probably just inside, right around there, a little bit further east perhaps.
So are we talking 20 yards?
It might be a little bit more, but it's not that far, as you can see.
Do we think we've done our due diligence in exploring whether we can move this structure 20 yards?
We did our due diligence with West New York, and they are, you were there, you questioned them, they were the opinion that to stabilize this is probably, and to put it back on a foundation, is probably somewhere in the vicinity of at least $1.5 million. The moving, they estimated at approximately $150,000 to $200,000, the actual moving of a building of this kind.
What is the cost of the new building?
I would probably in the things of a couple $100,000, hundreds of thousands, as opposed to that.
So the $1.5 million would be to restore it and reconstruct?
No, million. It would be $1.5 million to $2 million is the minimum to stabilize it, assuming they could. I think you heard them. They weren't even sure that they could stabilize it sufficiently to move it. Excuse me?
Have the tests been done to know that?
They were on the site. That's their experience. You questioned them. You heard it. I think there was some robust questioning at that meeting as to
I don't really remember
their opinion. I mean, we came away from that meeting, and you had the opportunity for probably 2 to 3 hours to ask those questions, which people did, because that was, I think, your #1 criteria, fundamental threshold. I believe, for those of you that weren't there, I hope it was conveyed that the West New York people were extremely credible and have significant experience. This was not someone that we scripted or was an advocate. He was speaking, I leave it to those of you that are at the meeting. I thought he was very objective. He was somewhat dispassionate in his approach. He wasn't trying to be, sell it. And I believe everyone who came out of that meeting felt that it was a credible and accurate statement of where we are at this point. And it is not, I don't think it was considered sustainable or feasible to move it. It may, at the cost of between $1.5 million and $2 million, and then he even claimed, and if people read the report, it's done by line item. It's a very detailed report. Again, we didn't give him those numbers. We didn't review those numbers. We didn't ask him to inflate those numbers. We took him at face value when he did it. And he said in the report that even at those numbers, there was a significant risk that it could not even be stabilized to the extent to move it, based on his experience and history of literally hundreds of these types of projects. So I thought we came away from that meeting with at least that issue addressed and resolved.
Just because in the time that has elapsed since that meeting, which has been, a few months, I think.
February 1st.
February 1st, thank you. I've done a lot of looking around, and I see a lot of people all over the country moving buildings. And, I don't know, 20 yards.
It's not the distance that's the issue. It's the ability to take something off and move it, and whether it's stable and whether it's just going to collapse. And there's been plenty of instances where that happens. It's not a matter of 20 yards versus 40 yards.
Well,
Again.
now this would be at the floodplain level too. Is it open so that if there is flooding, the water can go right through it?
It's at 15.
Huh?
No,
That's going to be at 15.
Correct, that will be built on 15 feet. So it'll be significantly above the female elevation.
So any parts would be protected, they're not going to be
Correct, yeah,
exposed to
just like the
flooding.
building, it'll be at the same elevation as the residential buildings, or thereabout.
While we're speaking about this elevation, Mr. Zarin, the primary access road to the development, the proposed development, is North Water Street, correct?
Correct.
Is the elevation of North Water Street going to be changed at all?
Yes, absolutely.
To 15 feet?
To the elevation,
Okay.
right.
Not to 15 feet, that's going to, I think, 10 feet, not as high.
10 feet.
Okay.
Are you going to be knocking down any of the buildings along North Water Street that lead to this?
No, we don't
Are you
own
attempting
those
to
buildings.
purchase any of them?
We don't own those buildings. We have no
Spoke to
control of
somebody
those
who said
buildings.
you were.
I'm assuming, my own assumption, and I think it's, words a little bit out there in the street, that one of the benefits of this development is going to be that it's probably going to trigger some of the other landowners taking a look at their structures and trying to upgrade them and revitalize and upgrade that entire area, including, if any of you have been on their road now, it's not really a road. It's certainly not a sustainable road. We are bringing the road to village standards, as well as including sidewalks on there. So, and that's not inexpensive. That will, I assume, trigger in the future, speculative, but I think it's not a unreasonable assumption that other people are going to look to upgrade their buildings and structures and really transform that area into a whole
Well, this
upgrade.
is light industry back there. Your neighbors are going to be light industry. They're going to be, they're warehouses. It's the former Filex building.
It's
I don't know what you expect ultimately them to do with those buildings, but,
the
not
comp
that concerned. I'm not that
plan.
concerned with what.
And it's not a concern. I mean, it's the village comp plan. The village comp plan expressly talks about the revitalization of this area. That's something that's been an express legislative objective of the village, an adopted legislative objective of the village. So I think it's the village policy to hope that area. Whether it happens and how it happens, I have no idea. I'm just, like I said before, Dana, I mean, I'm just speculating. It may never happen.
Well, my concern, I was looking through these, the Interior, Department of the Interior's guidelines here, and they talk about a building that a long time ago was taken apart. It was the McLean House where Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant. It was taken apart and dismantled and moved to Washington. The idea was to reconstruct it. It never happened, and the pieces disappeared. One of my concerns is, this is one of my concerns with what happens with this, that it's put in storage and never heard of again, for whatever reason, you know? And what guarantee do we have that these parts, that this will happen and the parts will be used, and, you know what I mean? Like, things happen.
Well, first of all, it's a requirement of SHPO. They've made these formal requirements. It's a requirement of the planning board. It's going to be an additional requirement, but I'm sure when we go back to the BAR, that's the architectural reform, that'll be, so we're not going to get our C of O, frankly, until we construct that building pursuant to the agreed upon plans and as we've presented it. And that's about as strong a incentive as you go on, and condition. It's not something that can just be disappear and all of a sudden the developer is seeking their C of O. No building per the plans, no C of O. That's about as great an incentive as you can have at this point in time.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Zarin. I'd invite members of the public who wish to speak to approach the microphone. Just state your name for the record and your address.
Chairman Markovitz and members of the Ossining Village Historic Preservation Commission. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm a bit chagrined that we only have 5 minutes to address this while the developer has multiple opportunities and longer opportunities to speak on behalf of his project. So I do think, in my opinion, that's a little bit unfair to limit people to the audience members to 5 minutes. That said, I strongly object to the proposed mitigation plan of Plateau Associates LLC to demolish and subsequently construct a new open-air pavilion that attempts to mimic the appearance of the original and historically designated Brandreth office building, and to achieve this purpose by the means of an issuance of a certificate of appropriateness by your commission. My objection is based on the following rationale. Number one, essentially, the lawful mandate and mission of the Historic Preservation Commission is to preserve, protect, promote, and defend the architecturally and historically significant buildings, structures, and sites of the village. And in no way does the proposed demolition of the still standing Brandreth office building and its faux reconstruction embody the letter and the spirit and the legal mandate and mission of your commission. 2, as you well know, the general purpose of a certificate of appropriateness is to help maintain and return the lost or diminished architectural significance of Ossining's tangible past. A certificate of appropriateness is required for projects that would alter the exterior appearance of a designated historic property. This certainly includes alterations and certainly demolition of a historically designated landmark or building. This building was landmarked by your commission, by the state of New York, and by the federal government. As yet, as far as I know, the applicant has not filed what I consider to be a sufficiently detailed description of the proposed pavilion. That may be it, I haven't seen it. That will allow you to decide on this matter. It seems that Plateau Associates' drawings of the proposed pavilion are not within the general objective of a certificate of occupancy that assures that any reconstruction of a demolished historic building needs to be well in keeping with the design and historic nature and quality of the original building. The proposed use by the developer of some of the building's materials and, quote, commemorative information that can be reasonably salvaged from the demolished building raises the specter of a half-baked attempt to comply with the COA requirements and the Secretary's requirements, Secretary of the Interior's requirements. In the estimation of experts in the field of historic preservation, a COA document requires a full, complete, detailed description of the proposed work, including site information, and most importantly, a full description of the materials that will be used in the reconstruction with samples of these materials. 4, it is important to note that the decisions about alterations, additions, rehabilitations, and reconstruction must be based on the Secretary of the Interior standards. They define construction as the act or process of depicting, by means of new construction, the form, features, and detailing of non-surviving site, landscape, building, structure, or object for the purpose of replicating its appearance at a specific period in time. Reconstruction is also based on the accurate duplication of historic features and elements substantiated by documentary or physical evidence, rather than on conjectural designs or the availability of different features from other historic properties. You heard the attorney say something about other buildings that might be used here for this purpose. A reconstructed property must have the appearance of a historic property in terms of materials.
Mr. Hernandez?
Was that my phone?
No, it's the timer. If you could come
I'm finished, I'm almost finished, okay? If you would grant me, he has a lot of time. I'm reading the page, I'm reading from the page, so every time you interrupt me, it takes up more time.
I'm not interrupting you, Mr. Hernandez. I'm about to tell you that we're keeping this hearing open for 10 days. So to the extent that you have anything in writing,
I do have something in writing, and I would like to finish my statement. I have a few more sentences to go.
okay, if you can wrap it up in
Thank
30
you.
seconds.
Yes. This is very unfair, Mr. Chairman. You're giving them all the time in the world. We have 5 minutes. That's unfair, sir. That's unfair. It's an arbitrary decision on your part. Okay, let me finish here. It seems that the developer is basing reconstruction of the Brandreth office building on what he claims can be reasonably salvaged. Who is to decide what is reasonably salvaged? Is it him? Or is it you? Or is it another body? Okay? This is a real question. What does reasonably mean? That you can drive a truck through reasonably. All of the above statements, enumerated statements considered, I believe that the best solution for going forward with this project is to incorporate / attach the Brandreth office building to the modern Hidden Cove building and repurpose it as its lobby entrance that could be open to the general public a couple of times a year for guided tours. It might seem anachronistic or jarring to combine two architectural periods of style, but it is done every day all across the United States. It bypasses the wasteful process of demolition and questionable reconstruction. It makes adaptive reuse an attractive and more innovative approach for salvaging the only remaining historic building on the site and to repurpose it for the project sponsor's stated public desires. In summary, adaptive reuse of the building is a fair compromise that allows the Hidden Cove project to go forward, and one that makes it possible for this site to keep its national New York State and local historic preservation status, which will be lost once the Bradworth office building is destroyed and replaced with a pavilion that has no redeeming historical value. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. And
That's my statement, and I hope you enter it into the record.
We've got it, and to the extent you wish to submit anything more, the record will stay open for an additional 10 days. This is for you, Mr. Hernandez, and for anyone in the public who wish to comment on the application. Would anyone else like to comment on the application at this time?
My name is Lisa O'Hanlon. I live in Ossining, and thank you for holding this meeting. I think it's really important for you all in your positions in this organization to remember always that historic preservation is not to be taken lightly. And with all due respect to Hidden Cove and all the wonders that they promise, you can't really stand here and talk about deconstruction. The word really is demolition, as Mr. Hernandez said. And I think it's important to read his words. I think it's also important when we're looking at history to think about kind of what it means. And I'd like you all to remember this. This is what that property looked like back before the roof was taken off, somehow, and somehow that great building, with all of its marvelous graffiti, actually, was lost forever. The only thing you can save now is that small little building, not that one, this one, that has Herman Melville. It has Edgar Allan Poe. I can read to you from Moby Dick. I've taught it probably 50 times. My copy of Moby Dick is actually at my school being used because our school is 100 years old this year. And I think it's really relevant when we live in a historic town to look around Westchester County. I live on Independence Place, 4th of July Hill, Ossining, New York. Sing Sing. There's a lot of history around here. Much of it has been lost. Urban renewal, God love the 70s for many other things. But what happened to the village of Ossining, to the downtown? I'm sure you've seen pictures if you weren't here to experience what Ossining could be. I don't know how they're going to put all those apartments, I guess a parking garage, parking spaces. If you can do that, you can spend $150,000, find somebody, Barnwood Builders, maybe they could do it, right? Somebody who can move that structure. So you can have your parking lot. Joni Mitchell, right? We know the song too. It's a cautionary tale. What happened behind this little supposed office structure? We can't get back. But I live a stone's throw away from that property. I'm one of very few people who takes advantage of it. And I think it's really important to understand that green space, open space, walking space, what he refers to as, Mr. Zarin refers to as dilapidated space, which is of course my neighborhood, is valuable for other reasons. Ossining does not have to be fully developed with every inch of that waterfront or near waterfront being taken up by countless apartment buildings and parking garages and parking spaces and a little teeny bit of green space. For the public, oh yes, we can walk through it, there's going to be public parking. There's plenty of green space in Westchester, plenty of green space right near here. The Rockefellers, thank God for that, right? We've got enough. We don't need a little pavilion that, as Mr. Hernandez said, is a far cry from the original, to replace what's already there. And go to Yonkers if you want to see how a city has taken things too far and has ruined its waterfront. You can't even see the water anymore. The few people who have those views, fair enough. There is no space left. When you take that train down to Hudson Line, I dare you to find, a view of the Hudson River. We have a lot, really, to work on developing, kind of in concert with the people who live here. Ossining is not everywhere else, and this is your charge, is to think about what that is going to look like with that instead of the original. It's just a small thing. But if we can do it, if there's a way to save it, we should do that first. Thank you.
Nailed it. Thank you. Anyone else like to comment on the application? Go ahead.
Hi, Jerry Wunderlich. I live at 8 North Water Street, which is adjacent to the property in question here. My family's a Brandreth family, and so I'm going to comment from that point of view. History is important. Legacy is important. History is important because it helps one understand the past and predict the future. And legacy gives one a sense of the current being based upon the past. The history and legacy of Brandreth, Benjamin Brandreth, and his accomplishments are important to Ossining. To put it in contemporary terms, Benjamin Brandreth was the Bill Gates of the patent medicine business. He was a pioneer in the use of mass advertising and created a brand for his product, and as a result, his product, Brandreth pills, were known and sold throughout the world. Benjamin Brandreth immigrated to the United States in 1835. He purchased land in Sing Sing, New York, 3 years later, and then built his first factory. Eventually, he employed over 100 residents of Sing Sing. In 1840, he became a citizen. 3 years later, he became president, now mayor of the village of Ossining, or then at that time Sing Sing. He was a founder and first president of the Westchester Savings Bank. He built the Brandreth Hotel near Canal and Broadway in New York City. He was twice elected state senator in the 1850s and lost a close election for a U.S. congressman as well. These are just a few of the accomplishments he obtained in his lifetime in Ossining. The Brandreth Pill Factory is a legacy of Benjamin Brandreth, and the village of Ossining should not only embrace the factory itself, but the historical buildings throughout Ossining. It brings a sense of worth and belonging to the citizens of Ossining. I note that 2 nearby villages have embraced their history, their buildings, just to the north. One is Beacon, New York, and the other is Hudson, New York. I travel to these towns on a regular basis for work and pleasure. They have renovated their downtowns, boutiques, art galleries, restaurants have opened up, driving a tourist trade to their villages during the weekends. What's the difference? They had the foresight to create a good development plans. They renovated some of the old factories and turned them into apartment spaces. They kept buildings at reasonable heights. They have embraced their history and their legacies. It is important for Ossining to understand its historical legacy. Brandreth Pill Factory is Ossining's legacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Please come on.
Good evening. My name is Linda. I live in Ossining. 35 years minus 2 months. I thank you for allowing us 5 minutes to talk and for the public to talk. In Ossining, very important. I left my talk home, and so I'm ad-libbing. I'll screw up, I know it. In Ossining Village, there are 64 historical and significant structures in 3.2 acres. I think that's pretty good. I followed Harbor Square development from the beginning to the end. I have followed the Brandreth Pill Factory since 2001 when the Stellatus brothers bought it. My opinion is they're dumping good money into bad. As far as this beautiful little building goes, why save it? We've got enough over here in Ossining. If somebody wants it, I'll bet you, maybe the Stellatus Brothers Plateau Associates will sell it to somebody for $1 and let them remove it. I don't want my tax dollars being spent on this. Lovely as it is, it's falling apart. To raise the building, put it on a trailer and move it is near to impossible. And it'll cost, what I understand, millions. Somebody should buy the building. This area where they want to put, if I remember, my memory is failing, I think it was 167 apartments? 137? Think of all the affordable apartments that will be there in this out-of-the-way area of Ossining Village. It's not well-traveled. I have a copy of the demolition permit from 2008. After the demolition permit was issued, somebody complained, they started demolishing it a few years later, and someone complained that it's a historic building, the main building I'm talking about. But they put a stop work order on it. But they were within their legal rights. I have a copy of the demolition permit. So they got the demolition permit, and then somebody made it historical. Sadly, in the demolition permit, if my memory is correct, they did not include the little building, little office building in the demo permit. That's why that little beautiful, beautiful building is still standing. It's falling apart. We need affordable housing. This is out of the way. The main area, the downtown area of Ossining there's no space for more housing. Everybody's clamoring about more affordable housing. Let them build it already. They bought this property in 2001. This is
19.
Thank you. Thank you. So they've had this, 17 years now. I've been to many of these meetings. I followed Harbor Square from the beginning to the end when there were 3 properties in there and the village took them over. Let them build already. If any resident wants to save that building, or the village of Ossining wants to, no, not the village, I don't want to pay for moving it. Let them buy it, let them move it. It's beautiful, but it's seen its day. Remember now, 64 historic and significant structures and areas in 3.2 miles. And there's somebody here in authority who gave me the numbers. Let it go. Let it go, just like I let go of an ex-husband. Let it go. Thank you for your time, and thank you very much for the 5 minutes. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to comment? Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to keep the hearing open for an additional 10 days so that members of the public who weren't able to be here tonight can submit comments in writing.
Can you just explain what that means? Can you, like, the hearing's open, can we appeal to you online? Is there a way to contact you?
For written comments, you can send, and actually I'll turn to Corporation Counsel for this.
The best thing to do is any written comments can be directed to the planning department. And if you send them there, they will be made part of a record. And Tracy, you can give whatever the email address is.
Yeah, the email address is J, as in job, Kane, Kane, at villageofossining.org. You can also always email plan@villageofossining.org. That one isn't always as readily answered, but we answer it every day.
And just make reference to Hidden Cove or
Yes.
Plateau Associates, then we'll know what it is. And we will then circulate that to all the members of the commission. But those comments will be accepted for another 10 days, so that will be till the 13th. Right, till Thursday the 13th.
Okay, that concludes the public hearing. Again, the records will remain open until June 13th for written comments.
Adam, you should take a motion to do that, to keep it open. If you, we're going to close it, but except for written comments, we're going to entertain a motion to do that.
Sure.
To informally do that.
Would anyone like to move to keep the record open for an additional 10 days?
Close the hearing.
And we're going to close, Michael, Michael,
Yes.
we'll do it,
I'm here.
okay? We're going to close the hearing at this time.
Yeah, we're closing the public hearing. So a motion to close the public hearing, but keep the record open for an additional 10 days.
So moved.
Seconded?
Second.
Seconded by Gowdy? Okay,
All in favor?
Aye. okay. All right, that concludes the first item on this evening's agenda.
Thank you.
Public
Thank you.
hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zarin.